Everyone, good evening. Welcome to this webinar, Euthanasia, a warning from Canada. I'm Paul Atkin. I run the pro-life office here in the Archdiocese, and I'm joined this evening by Alex Schadenberg, who is the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition based in London, Ontario. Alex, welcome to Scotland. Great to see you. Tell us why you're here.
Well, I'm in Scotland because the Scottish government is right now talking about legalizing euthanasia or assisted suicide. We haven't actually seen the wording of the bill, and I'm here to warn the members of your Scottish Parliament that this is a road they should not be going down. That they might be thinking that, there's people suffering and these kind of things, and of course this is a concern as a human being, because none of us want to suffer. But you're going down a road that's going to lead to where we are in Canada, where they are in the Netherlands and Belgium, which has got to do with a lot of killing. So in my own country, we started with a law in 2016, which had a type of a terminal illness restriction in it type thing. That was removed in 2021. And now we have all these situations of people with disabilities who are dying by euthanasia based on poverty, homelessness, and issues around having difficulties getting medical treatment. The concepts that no one thought about when they were debating euthanasia as becoming a reality have become a reality. And the problem is opening the door to killing.
Okay, so I understand that the law was extended. So could you maybe just walk us back to where it started and kind of where we are now?
Yeah, so we legalized in 2016. So how we legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide. Now, when I say we legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide, at the end of 2022, the data showed we had 31,600 deaths in the end of 2022. So that was the end of 2021. But of the 31,600 deaths, only 7 of them were assisted suicide. The rest were all euthanasia. The difference between the two is euthanasia we legalized by creating an exception in our criminal code to homicide. So euthanasia is when the doctor, in Canada could also be a nurse, are directly involved with actually killing you. They do the act. It's not just prescribing. Whereas assisted suicide, they prescribe you the same drugs and you have to take it yourself. So the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide is not the outcome. The outcome is the intentional death. It's not, the issue of whether your life is worth living. They've decided your life is not worth living. The difference is how it is carried out. And euthanasia is carried out by the physician or the nurse, where they actually do the act to you. So that'd be homicide. Whereas in assisted suicide, they prescribe you the same lethal drugs, but you have to take it yourself. So we legalized both.
So how did it start? What were the original criteria in Canada when the law was first passed in 2016?
Well, the original criteria were that you had to be 18, that your natural death had to be deemed reasonably foreseeable. That was their terminal illness sort of restriction, but that was never defined. So that right off the bat created some stories of concern because they never defined the law. You also had to be, as I say, 18 years old, and you had to be suffering. Now, the problem with this concept of suffering and putting that in the law is it's totally subjective, because if I tell you I'm suffering, you can't tell me I'm not suffering. It's not possible for you to tell me I'm not suffering. And I'm going to go into that in a minute later on. But anyway, then in 2021, we changed the law. So in 2021, we passed this Bill C7, which removed the terminal illness requirement. We had a 10-day waiting period in the original law. We removed the 10-day waiting period, and we added euthanasia for mental illness alone. Now, when I'm saying mental illness alone, meaning you don't have to have any other medical conditions. If you have a mental illness alone, you would be qualified. Now, the euthanasia for mental illness alone has not actually been implemented in the law yet, because originally they put a 2-year moratorium on that, and then they extended that by another year, and now the Parliament's just extended that to March of 2027. So they haven't said no to euthanasia for mental illness. They've just delayed that until March of 2027. So this has been a big debate, this whole issue of euthanasia for mental illness in our country. But you can see...
Surely some people might say if you have the symptoms or a diagnosis of a mental illness, that itself would be the reason for not thinking about suicide.
Well, normally speaking, if you go through a type of a mental illness and you're experiencing suicidal ideation, that would be seen as, a symptom of your medical condition, and they would be treating you for your suicidal ideation. But in this case, if you had a irremediable medical condition, so I should digress quickly and come back. So in 2021, when we removed that terminal illness requirement from the law, what remained in the law was you had to have an irremediable medical condition, which was not defined, but nonetheless, it tends to mean that you have a disability or a chronic medical condition which is not getting better. So when you put in this situation, euthanasia for mental illness alone, it would be somebody who has a mental illness which is not getting better, like it's, they would say, resistant to treatment. Now, the problem with that idea is, how do you determine that? And of course, you can't determine that. And that's the whole point. Psychiatrists in Canada are saying over and over again, it's impossible to determine. And yes, so now you put up the picture of Dr. Sonia Gain. Dr. Sonia Gain is very interesting because he is a past president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association, and he's made it very clear he's not against euthanasia. He's against euthanasia for mental illness because he's made it very clear over and over again. It's impossible to determine whether a patient who has a mental illness has an irremediable medical condition, meaning that they're not going to get better. He says they cannot predict that. It's not possible to predict it. And in their practice, they know that some people don't get better, but you don't know who will not get better and who will get better. He says, I simply don't know. What I know is that some people react to some therapies and not to others. And that seems to be the reality. But euthanasia for mental illness is a big concern because, obviously speaking, when you're talking about legalizing euthanasia, they sold it in our country, and the same ideas they're talking about in Scotland, which these would be competent adults who are capable of consenting, right? But if you're a competent adult capable of consenting, when you're talking about issues around mental illness, the question of competency really comes into question. Now, are they fully competent? How do you prove they're fully competent? I'm opposed to killing anybody. So obviously speaking, I'm opposed to euthanasia for all reasons, but it starts becoming pretty, crazy when we're talking about euthanasia for mental illness.
Sure. So it's kind of in the pipeline, but it's been paused. How about the rest of euthanasia in Canada? How's that working out? Because we hear about different abuses and concerns.
Right. So the euthanasia has really expanded quickly in Canada. That's the first thing. So, they said to us during the original debate on this in 2014, 2015, 2016, we would not be like the Netherlands or Belgium. That's what they kept on saying to us. So, it's interesting. When I come to the UK and I come to Scotland, when I go to all these different countries, they all say the same thing. Oh, it's not going to be like that in our country. And my response is, well, that's exactly what they told us in Canada. It will not be like that in Canada. But of course, it has been like that. In fact, we have now, in many ways, surpassed the Netherlands in our euthanasia deaths. And there's nothing to be proud about, but it shows you that, all these predictions, the opposite has come true.
Sure.
And that graph is very interesting. I'm predicting that in 2023, we had 16,000 euthanasia deaths. I recently received the Quebec data. Quebec has the highest euthanasia rate in the world at 7.3% of all deaths. And so when we're looking at this, it's gone crazy, but also the types of deaths really changed. So one of the things that happened when we took out the terminal illness requirement. Now, first of all, some of the stories I talk about happened previous to 2021, but after 2021, we had then basically a law that allowed euthanasia for irremediable medical conditions. So people with disabilities essentially qualified to be killed. So you have people who are living in abject poverty, people who are homeless, who are asking for euthanasia, not because they wanted to die, but they were saying, I can't afford a place to live. I can't find a place to live on my disability pension, or I don't have any money to live. I'm living in abject poverty. So they've asked for euthanasia, and they died by euthanasia, not because there was this freedom of choice concept that was sold to them. It's because they were saying, I can't live like this anymore. These were things that people said would never happen. And of course, it is happening, and it's becoming more common.
What was the name of the guy? There was a Canadian, I think, that he was homeless, and eventually they crowdfunded to find him accommodation.
Right. So Amir Farsoud was the case of the man. So he wasn't yet homeless. So what happened to him is Amir Farsoud, that's him right there. Yes, he was a man who lived in St. Catharines, Ontario, and the building he lived in, he was in a subsidized apartment, and the building was sold to a new owner, and the new owner told him he had to leave because they were going to change over the building. They were going to do repairs, etc. But on his disability pension, he could not afford a regular priced rent anywhere. It was not possible. He could not find a place to live. So he applied for euthanasia, was approved for euthanasia based on his disability. But he said the reason he wanted to die was not because he wanted to die. It's because he said, I would rather die than be homeless because I can't find a place I can afford to live. So a group of people set up a GoFundMe page, and they raised money for him, and they did then therefore find him a place to live. But he's only one story like that. Like when you talk about other stories, some of these stories are actually pre-change in the law. So we have the story of Alan Nichols that was in 2019. And I don't know if you have his picture here, but Alan Nichols in 2019 was going through severe depression. And this was not new for Alan Nichols, okay? There he is right there. That actually is a picture taken the night before he died, okay? That's his brother behind him. And his brother actually was shocked that he was approved for euthanasia, trying to convince him not to die. But Alan he would go deep into depression many times in his life. And in 2019, he asked for euthanasia. He was approved for euthanasia, and he died. All he had was deep depression. But for Alan, this was not a new situation. He often had gone into deep depression and came back out again and was fine. But in this case, he died by lethal poison. Well, obviously speaking, he had no opportunity to get better after that.
Yeah. And the case I've seen here was the woman who was the Canadian veteran, and she was asking for help with a disability.
Well, we have the whole veteran stories. There's several of them. This is Christine Gauthier. Her story actually really caused a lot of difficulty for the government, because what happened first is we had a story of a soldier who had served our country in Afghanistan, who was experiencing PTSD, and he went to Veteran Services to try and get psychiatric help for his PTSD. And what happened is that the Veterans Affairs worker said, well, have you thought about medical aid in dying, which is what we call euthanasia in Canada? Medical aid in dying, just so you know, is a Canadian term that was invented to make you feel better about killing, okay? That's what it came from. Then our Veterans Affairs Minister came forward and had a press conference saying, well, that was just one bad case. That was a rogue employee. We don't do that kind of thing. Of course, as soon as you have a press conference of someone saying it was one bad case, obviously other cases start popping up. We then learned that there was at least 6 of those cases that occurred. At least 2 people died by euthanasia. And then the Christine Gauthier case came forward. Now, Christine was a Canadian soldier who became injured as a Canadian soldier. She then, after she left the military, became a wheelchair athlete, won a bunch of awards as a wheelchair athlete. She was asking Veterans Affairs for a wheelchair ramp. If you look at the regulations, she qualifies for a wheelchair ramp. It's not unreasonable that a woman in a wheelchair who served our country to get help with a wheelchair ramp in her home. But Veterans Affairs told her that if it's that bad, Christine, then maybe you should be thinking about medical aid in dying. This is the kind of thing again. Now, you would say those are bad cases, these are one-offs. No, it shows you the culture shift that happens when you consider killing to be an acceptable solution to these problems.
Yes, because I was going to say many of us on the call might think, well, look, euthanasia will never be an option for us, but how has this changed the landscape of end-of-life care for everyone in Canada?
Well, this is a serious issue because what's happened is it's being treated to be like a medical treatment, even though it's not. So when I said to you in the beginning that how we legalize euthanasia is we created an exception in the criminal code to homicide, but they treat it as a medical situation because doctors and nurses are the ones who, by law, carry it out. So what's happened is that they say because it's a legal service, therefore, everyone in the medical system should know that it's available to them. And on top of it, every doctor must refer. Now, in some places, the referral issue has actually not been an issue because they actually have conscience rights. But in most of Canada, they don't have conscience rights and are pressured to refer. What has happened is that you've also had a great effect on palliative care. For instance, the Delta Hospice Society is a prime example. The Delta Hospice Society is in British Columbia. Delta, BC is just near Vancouver, if you look it up on a map. And the Delta Hospice Society was defunded, and their 10-bed hospice was expropriated from them because they refused to do euthanasia. It's a bit crazy if you think about it that this is an organization that had their building expropriated from them. Now, most recently, we have this situation in Quebec. So in June, Bill 11 was passed in Quebec, which makes it an obligation of all hospices to provide euthanasia. So, for instance, the St. Raphael Hospice in Montreal is owned, and it has been funded by the Archdiocese of Montreal. They signed a contract with the Quebec government in 2019 for 100 years, which included that they would not have to perform or have anything to do with euthanasia. And they're now being told they have to do it. So now the Archdiocese of Montreal has taken the Quebec government to court. But this is the kind of thing you're getting, the change in end-of-life care, because killing has become part of the option that must be available. And one other little thing is important is most Canadian hospitals, at least all major Canadian hospitals, have what you call a MAID team. That's a euthanasia team. They set up these MAID teams because they said, well, every patient should know they have the option of death, of being killed. So the MAID team is in the hospital. What is their job? Their job is to go and inform the patients that MAID is available to them. And if they want it, they're to assess them and then go ahead and kill them. So you have these MAID teams in all major hospitals. Now, that's one of the reasons we have such a high euthanasia rate, because the government's gone out of their way to make sure that everyone knows that they can be killed.
Yeah. And presumably as well, I know we have a number of doctors on the call. It's affecting the role of doctors and the confidence in the medical profession.
Absolutely. We've lost a lot of doctors in Canada. The only province in Canada that has conscience rights actually is Manitoba. Some provinces, such as Alberta, have not created a situation of pressure on their physicians. But in my own province of Ontario, doctors have to do what you call an effective referral. So doctors don't have to kill someone, but they're being told by the College of Physicians that they must do an effective referral, which means referral for the purpose of the act. So a doctor is not willing to kill you, is told they must send you to the killer. Well, a lot of these physicians are saying, I'm going to do neither. So we've had quite a few physicians who are in their 60s who retired early. They had no intention of retiring, but they retired early. We've had quite a few leave the province. I was just at a Christmas party in November, and a friend of mine who's a physician, he said, Alex, did you hear the news? And I said, what news? He says, my medical license has just been approved in Ohio. I'm moving to Ohio. So as of January 1st, he became a full-time physician in Ohio. It meant that we lost a physician who was around 40 years old. We lost him from Ontario when we already have a shortage of physicians. This is the kind of thing that happens. And of course, I want a physician that won't kill me. And if you lose them, you lose that physician who shares your belief that your life is valuable. And remember, we all go through difficult times in our life. Like we all go through difficult times emotionally and psychologically. It's important to have a physician that won't kill you.
Yeah. But supporters of the current legislation in Scotland and what's being proposed, they might say, okay, we get you, there's certainly problems with the situation in Canada, but what we're proposing is based on the Oregon law. So why is Canada relevant, or can't we do things the way Oregon have done things?
Well, first of all, we actually haven't seen the bill. So will it actually be like the Oregon law? I'm not sure. It might be very similar to Oregon. We will see when it comes out. But even then, Oregon's expanded their law too. So when they talk about, Oregon legalized this in 1998, and they still have assisted suicide there, that's only a very temporary issue. A lot of people don't realize that California has just introduced a bill to make their assisted suicide law turn into a euthanasia law. And that bill also removes the 6-month definition of terminal illness. So in Oregon and California, they use this definition that you would have to have a 6-month prognosis to death. And that this bill would remove that, and they want to use the same language as in the Canadian legislation, that you'd have to have an irremediable medical condition, which is completely undefined and essentially means people with disabilities are able to be killed for pretty much every reason, because to have a disability tends to mean you have an irremediable medical condition, meaning you're not getting better, right? That's the whole idea of an irremediable medical condition. So people with chronic conditions qualify. So just because you think you're going to go an Oregon model, well, the Oregon model might also be changing very soon, if not next year or the year later. Once you open the door is the point. Once you open the door to killing, what's happened in Canada, which is the same thing you're going to experience, before you legalize, it seems reasonable to have certain safeguards, certain restrictions in the law. But once you legalize, those restrictions aren't the same anymore. They're seen then as how would you say, a blockage to access. So based on equality, because that's what's happened in Canada, based on equality, you must expand the law. So the argument was made, for instance, so now in Canada, just so you know, we're talking about euthanasia for mature minors, as an example.
Right, is that not a contradiction?
Well, a mature minor, means that someone who's determined by their physician to be capable of consenting for the act. But the reason we're talking about euthanasia for mature minors is that we had a government committee look at the law, and they said it's discrimination not to allow mature minors to have euthanasia. Just like they said for euthanasia for mental illness alone, when we were debating that in 2021, the argument was it was discrimination because people with mental illness are suffering. Well, I agree with you. People with mental illness are suffering. I'm not going to argue that. Of course they're suffering. But is death the answer to their condition? I think that death is never the answer to one's condition, but you can see how they said it's a discrimination. You're actually discriminating against these people because they don't have a physical condition. It's a psychological or a mental type condition. And therefore, we must then eliminate that discrimination. And that's how they talked about it in Canada, and that's exactly where they're going. They're pushing to eliminate all this based on equality. Yeah. You can't have an inequality in the law, they would argue.
So last question, and then we'll bring in Gordon from Care Not Killing. But what you've called for is a culture of care instead. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's several things I'm going to say with that. Well, first of all, killing becoming an acceptable solution to human situations actually leads you down the road of more killing. And part of the problem is that the culture has shifted. We have more loneliness, isolation, people feeling that their life lacks meaning, purpose, and value than ever before. We have a helpline that we have in Canada, and I'm often answering the helpline number. Right now I'm in Scotland, so I don't actually have the helpline coming to my phone, so that's fine. But anyway, we've had quite a few people who are approved for euthanasia, approved for MAID, who have contacted us. And I always ask them the question after listening to them, hearing them out, having them talk about their story, where they're coming from. What I always ask them, well, why do you actually want your doctor to kill you? And the response is always the same. It's always either, but there's nobody in my life, there's no reason, or I feel hopeless. I feel I have no reason or purpose. And this is exactly what a lot of people are going through today more than ever before. We need a culture that cares. You need to recognize if you're a person of faith who cares about people, you need to recognize the importance of being with your neighbors and your friends and your family, and recognizing that you can be that positive influence in their life, because you'd be shocked how many people never have someone actually ask them how their day was. The number of people who feel that they have no purpose for living. And if you think about what it means to be human, what's our human experience? We need in our lives other people who are significant community. And in the modern world where we've become highly individualistic, we seem to be losing some of that. In my opinion, the reason euthanasia is taken off in Canada, and why if you legalize it in Scotland, it's going to take off, is the individualism as in our culture has removed that absolute need we have as human beings, which is the being with others. Yeah. And in that case, you become very lonely. And guess what? Sometimes people think that death is the better option, when really they need someone who cares about them.
Couldn't agree more. So let's take it to Scotland then. Gordon MacDonald is with us tonight. Gordon is the CEO of Care Not Killing, which coordinates campaigns here against that. Gordon, what's happening in Holyrood now regarding the bill?
Well, Liam MacArthur has indicated just in the last week or two that he is planning to publish his bill probably within the next couple of weeks, or maybe just after the Easter recess. So that will happen, and then after that, the Parliament will appoint a committee to look at the bill. They will issue a call for evidence. People can submit written evidence, and then probably after the summer, there will be oral evidence sessions in the Scottish Parliament.
Got you. And there's different language getting used here in Scotland. We're talking about assisted, I think it's assisted dying now. It was assisted suicide. I mean, are these things just euphemisms, or is there a difference we should be thinking about?
No, the language has been changed by campaigners for a change in the law in order to make it more palatable. But of course, what happened in the Scottish Parliament in the first bill that was considered in 2010 was called the End of Life Assistance Bill. And one of the criticisms of that bill was the euphemistic language, because the public often don't understand what's being referred to, a majority of the public don't realise that the term assisted dying is referring to giving lethal drugs to people to end their lives. So that criticism was taken on board. And then the second time Margot MacDonald, the late Margot MacDonald, brought a bill forward, she called it the Assisted Suicide Scotland Bill, which is what she was referring to. And she was more honest the second time. Liam MacArthur and those who are working with him have clearly decided that the fact that it was called assisted suicide put some of the MSPs off from voting for it. And so they have now gone back to the more ambiguous language, which people don't really fully understand.
And do you think there's a real danger of, what Alex has outlined for us, what's clearly gone badly wrong in Canada, those dangers of equally could be faced here?
Yes, I do. I think that it can happen over time. No parliament can bind its successor. So it's highly likely that there will be cases where people will not qualify and the law will be expanded. But, from what we've seen from Liam MacArthur's consultation, and we haven't seen the text of the bill yet, he wasn't proposing that there should be any sort of 6-month prognosis of death. He was also suggesting, certainly in the medical advisory group, it was suggested that, if the drugs don't work and the patient either vomits or chokes and doesn't die, that a doctor could step in with an emergency IV. So that wasn't clear as to whether or not the purpose of that was to resuscitate the patient or to kill the patient, probably to kill the patient, which is euthanasia. So once you legalize euthanasia in some circumstances, why would you not legalize it in other circumstances? And the real challenge is that once you've shifted across that Rubicon, then the courts will no longer be saying, well, this is a matter for Parliament. They will be saying, is this law fair? Is this law just under equality law? And the courts are much more likely to make decisions which will then expand the law on that basis.
Got it. So what should we be doing now in Scotland? The bill isn't published yet, but there's got to be something we should be doing.
Yeah, clearly MSPs need to hear from their constituents, and we're encouraging people to write to their MSPs. We've all got 8 MSPs, 1 constituency and 7 regional ones. MSPs, like all of us, are conflicted on controversial, difficult moral issues. They look at what's happened in their own family often to make up their mind as to how they would vote on these things. And they listen to their constituents. They listen to healthcare professionals in particular, but also other constituents who've got their own personal experiences. And so we would be encouraging people to write to their MSPs, email them, go and see them at their constituency surgeries, which you can find about online. Sign our petition, and Care Not Killing can keep you informed about what's happening at the Scottish Parliament and also give you advice on how to make contact with your MSPs and what to say when you go and see them. And if you're a healthcare professional, then we would encourage you to join our campaign, Our Duty of Care. We have a website called ourdutyofcare.org.uk. Sign up to that campaign if you're a healthcare professional. That'd be great. Thanks.
Great. And we will, at the end of the webinar, we'll link people to the Scottish Parliament where they can put in their postcode and look up their MSPs. But just finally, for your good self, there's quite a lot of people here from England, and I know Keir Starmer said something recently about euthanasia or a vote in Parliament if he becomes Prime Minister when the election comes.
Yeah, so Keir Starmer has today said that he will ensure that government time is made available for a private member's bill at Westminster. This has been a long-term campaign aim of Dignity in Dying, the former Voluntary Euthanasia Society. They've been trying to get government to commit to this for 5 years. And Keir Starmer has said that if Labour win the election and he's the Prime Minister, that he will make that commitment, whereas the previous Prime Ministers have not done so. So this isn't a party political issue for us. There are people from all parties who have fought for this and against this. But clearly, if a Prime Minister or a future Prime Minister is willing to put his personal support and weight behind it, then that's very, very concerning. And Sir Keir Starmer himself voted for this back in 2015 when Rob Marris brought a bill forward.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you very much, Gordon. Alex, just to finish it off, what would be your key message to viewers and to Scottish politicians here?
You don't open the door to this. As I've said to many people, when you open the door, there's always another door on the other side. And so you're thinking you're going through one door, but in fact, you're going through another door also. And this is exactly what happens with these laws. And I think Gordon hit the nail on the head when he said again that even in Scotland, that once it's legal, if it were to become legal, that is, the question would become, is the law equally applied? Is this a fair law? Is this fair to all people in Scotland? And of course, they would do the same thing as in Canada, where they've expanded the law, and it expands very quickly once it gets started. The problem also is how it changes the culture. So you don't want to open this door. You don't want to go down this road. You want to be committed to caring for people, not killing them.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex, Gordon. Thank you both very much for your time. Lots to think and work with there, and wish you the best of luck in the rest of your visit. Thank you.